So this morning, we're going to explore our dream world. All of us have entertained the absurd, I think, a seemingly ridiculous idea or an over-the-top dream or ambition or an impulse to say, do, or be something that would, let's put it this way, offend polite society. I know we all have because all of us experience this often during childhood and adolescence. And I hope you still do, to a degree, as an adult. Children are known to freely express their inner world artistically. We've all seen a child's drawing that was out of the ordinary, and that is a nice way to say it. I've seen crayon houses on top of trees, cats riding on the backs of dogs, and of course, a young child flying through the air. Now, why do we encourage such creative imagination in kids, but discourage it in adults? Just a question. I have a feeling if you are like me and most others, at some time, usually during young adulthood, you began to tamper down any thoughts, ideas, or dreams that seemed offensive or way out there, crazy, even nonsensical, even though it tickled our imagination, mesmerized us for a time. Why are we so quick to censor ourselves? Well, two reasons come to mind right off the bat. One, we don't want our friends to think we are mad. It's peer pressure. But there's another reason. I think family begins to encourage practicality over big, hairy, audacious dreams, particularly when we are in our early 20s or late teens. Polite and practical society even encourages saner, more down-to-earth behaviors and perspectives rather than free expressions of the creative imagination. I want to discuss during this presentation an artist who allowed his creative mind to play continuously on the canvas as he explored the adventurous and sometimes frightening terrain of his unconscious. I'm referring, of course, to the Spanish surrealist Salvador Dali. Salvador Dali was the consummate showman, part marketing genius and part jester. He was outrageous and controversial. Dali once said, quote, "My personality is 1,000 times much more important than my painting," unquote. Dali often poked fun at the pretentiousness of the art world. Let me play the role of the jester just for a moment. Why do we dress up to view art and swill wine in large fancy glasses and alter our normal speech by using rare descriptive vocabulary? Why don't we look at art wearing cutoffs, like cutoff jean shorts or a t-shirt and flip-flops while holding a can of Mountain Dew? Why don't we describe the art using our typical everyday slang? Dali criticized our pretentiousness about art because art for Dali was something more. It was self-therapy. It was self-exploration. What he discovered and expressed through his art, some found shocking. But if we were to turn a bright light onto our own suppressed thoughts, feelings, imagery, would we be any less shocked by what we discover? Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate, said Carl Gustav Jung. Dali said, "The only difference between me and a madman is that I am not mad." Would anyone accuse us of being strange, even mad? If not, then why not? Is it because we have properly and appropriately suppressed our true nature, have not allowed the world to catch a glimpse of what lies beneath, our wild ideas, our most pungent anxieties? Every single one of us has a shadow, a part of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge, experiences we don't want to process or relive, emotions we don't want to feel. What I'd like us to explore today is whether we have gone too far in that suppression. What would our lives be like if we let rise to the surface the sludge we have long buried, or let live the parts of our personality we fear would chase people away? What if we felt the tang of a pure, free release of our full personality? Let's start with a little pertinent biographical information on our guide today, the artist Salvador Dali. Dali was born May 11th, 1904, in Figueres, Catalonia, Spain, which is near the French border. Similar to what happened to Vincent van Gogh, Salvador had an older brother who died 9 months before Salvador was born, and they shared the same name. Salvador was haunted by his never-seen older brother during much of his adult life and eulogized him in his artwork. Dali experienced an enormous blow when he was 16 as well. His mother died, his beloved mother. His father soon married his mother's sister. Okay, strange. But Dali loved his aunt, so he didn't resent his father for marrying her. He didn't consciously resent his father marrying his aunt. Dali painted this self-portrait when he was around 17 years old. With that exaggerated neck, we can see that he is already anxious to challenge the conventional, to express who he is in an exaggerated manner. The same year, he painted these self-portraits. The one on the left looks like the artist was influenced by Odilon Redon. This may sound hard to believe, but Dali, when he was young, was extremely shy. We could see that his art will slowly dissolve that shyness into quite the opposite. In these 3 self-portraits, all done around the same time, Dali is searching for his style, which really is a search for himself. Dali, according to biographer Ian Gibson, possessed a pathological sense of anxiety, inadequacy, and shame around his sexuality that were later expressed in his art. When he was a young boy, his father left out a medical textbook open to an article on gonorrhea, and I don't believe it was accidentally left out for Dali to see. Dali read the article and was scarred for life. But he sought through his art to release his anxieties and simultaneously express empowering imagery. Now let's look at a close-up here. He also felt androgynous, which we can sense in the adult figure here. The complexity of his sexuality, which he knew he actively suppressed, he knew it, was one of the reasons he was drawn to the ideas of Sigmund Freud. So drawn that the ideas of the unconscious and the secrets dreams hold became like a new religion to him. He even described his turn toward surrealism as a conversion experience, mainly because of the art movement's affinity to the work of Freud. Surrealism was his therapeutic dream work, his bringing out the shadow onto the canvas. Here is one of the earliest of his surrealistic works, done in 1929. Dali referred to his art as hand-painted dream photographs. Hand-painted dream photographs. And he referred to his method of creation as the, quote, paranoid critical, unquote, approach. Paranoid critical approach. By that he meant he first delved deep into his psyche to discover all of his psychological conflicts and phobias. He would enter a delirious state in which his dream world would develop a harmonious relationship to his waking world. Most of the early surrealists had read Sigmund Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams. In that book, Freud proposed that the source of most of our anxieties and neuroses were events in our childhood. An exploration of our childhood, along with an examination of our dreams, were keys to unlock the buried secrets that cause so much of our maladaptive behaviors and dis-ease. Freud wrote, "The interpretation of dreams is the royal road to a knowledge of the unconscious activities of the mind." And then this gem: "Dreams are often most profound when they seem the most crazy." Well, Dali's work certainly lends legitimacy to that statement. Let's focus in on Dali's painting. This is not fully a painting, but actually a collage, because it does include photographs. And in particular, on the left close-up, there's a tiny photo of Dali as a child, right in the middle of the work. So Dali is telling us right up front, this work is about an exploration of his childhood. And then close by is this troubling sexual illusion you see on the right. A couple together in front of a postcard which extols the frivolity and romance of a cruise ship. Who is the man on the left, gagged, whose hands seem to dissolve into a flow of color? Gagged and without usable hands to enjoy the woman, perhaps it is an expression of a profound feeling of impotence. Now, the disturbing and objectified woman is a whole other topic that would take another presentation or perhaps several presentations. So I think I'll move on. With full bravado that would come to characterize his personality, Dali described this work as a veritable erotic delirium. Now for some other close-ups of that painting. On the left, a man leading a small child near a precipice. It's probably a young Dali with his father. And in the middle, a strange and troubling image of two similar looking men resembling Dali's father. What is happening here? At the time this was painted, the relationship between Dali and his father was strained, to say the least. His father disapproved of Dali's commitment to be an artist. And then on the right, a young person with long hair and dress seeming to offer something to the figure on the right. The younger figure could be Dali himself, for his mother had wanted a girl when she was pregnant with Dali, and she dressed Dali as a girl during his childhood. No surprise that Dali developed more than a few complexes. And since childhood, Dali had a pathological fear of many types of insects, including grasshoppers you see in this close-up. Having this grasshopper attach itself to what is probably a self-portrait represents an expression, I believe, of the courage Dali needed to explore the darkest parts of his psyche. In Dali's oeuvre, his body of work, no stone will be left unturned. As strange and troubling as this imagery may seem, the public loved it. And Dali became very wealthy very early in his artistic career. And then there's this work, perhaps the most famous surrealist work on the planet. I took this picture actually, so you would see how it is displayed with its brown felt mat and simple frame. Just 3 years after it was painted, just 3 years, in 1934, it was anonymously donated to the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. So how fortuitous is that for the new museum at the time? And surprisingly, to all who see it in person, the painting is not much larger than a sheet of notebook paper. It's 9.5 inches by 13 inches. Here's a full view. As is obvious, Dali is already a master at the tender age of 27. Now, at first, this looks like a completely imaginative work. But the cliffs are from his native Catalonia, Spain, and so is the sand and the sea. Scholars universally refer to this image that looks like, I think, a carcass of some exotic animal as a self-portrait of the artist sleeping. One of the melting clocks lays over the sleeping artist. Dali said he was inspired to create these clocks the way he did after seeing camembert cheese melting in the hot sun. Well, what do they mean? Well, for one thing, in our dream state, we don't have a sense of the passage of time. Space and time become meaningless. This work also included insects, ants. Notice the ants are on the only solid symbol of time in the painting, a pocket watch. Now, based on the whole body of work of Dali and statements he made, we can be certain the ants refer to decay, and thus Dali's obsession with his own mortality, the decay of objective time as we age. But this was painted when Dali was only 27. Would he have been obsessed with mortality at such a young age? Well, with Dali's long list of phobias and neuroses, I think we can comfortably say, yes, he would have been. We know from his own words that he was haunted by the dead brother he never knew and the loss of his mother when he was young. And so the idea of death and mortality entered his psyche powerfully at a young age. Now, next to this pocket watch is the largest of the melting clocks. If the pocket watch with ants represents the decay of objective time and hence mortality, I believe the large melting clock nearby could represent its opposite, a desire for that state of being when time and space cease to govern our days. Yes, it occurs briefly during our dream state when we sleep, but time becomes meaningless when we consider our eternal state. In the afterlife, if you believe in that sort of thing, time also ceases. There is a third melting watch. It lays over a denuded tree. Art scholars mostly agree that based on other works, this is an olive tree. Olive trees traditionally represent peace. But at the time this was painted, Spain was experiencing intense civil strife, which would result in the Spanish Civil War. Now, what of this watch laying over the dead tree? This is 1931, and all the public at this time was fascinated by Einstein's theory of relativity. According to this theory, time is not fixed. The passage of time depends on the perspective and situation of the observer. If the observer is moving extremely fast, time appears to move slower. In the context of civil strife, could it be an attempt on the artist's part to put the civil turmoil in some greater context, or represent a desire to slow time as to make sense of the threat and perhaps stave off impending war? I don't know. What do you think? With all of this symbolic language, can we draw some conclusions about the actual meaning of this painting? We know from Dali himself that Sigmund Freud had an enormous influence on him. Dali said, quote, "The last relationship between two human beings is the relationship of Freud and Dali," unquote. Yes, he often talked about himself in the third person. Ego inflation is a classic indicator of overcompensation for feelings of inadequacy in other areas of one's life. Well, here's one clue to the meaning of the painting. He said, "I believe in the resurrection of bodies. I desire eternal afterlife with the persistence of memory." I desire eternal afterlife with the persistence of memory. With Dali, you can never be sure what any of his provocative statements mean, but this appears to be the desire for some aspect of his personality to continue after his physical body is gone. Dali was certainly familiar with Eastern concepts of our energy merely being reabsorbed into the one creative energy, which is the source of all. He was also familiar with our consciousness, like a drop of water being absorbed back into the ocean that is pure consciousness, or Brahman, underlying all that exists. But that didn't seem to satisfy him for an afterlife. He wanted an aspect of himself to live on, his memories of this life, if nothing else. Losing all of this to become energy reabsorbed into an impersonal great energy doesn't satisfy many of us either, born in the West. For Dali, the dream state was like a foretaste of what eternity might be like. when time and space cease to limit our experience of reality. Dali yearned for an eternal life, and through his art discovered a way to prevent the suppression of uncomfortable thoughts and feelings so that he experienced some level of freedom from their oppressive potential. Some might say, as his fame grew, he became too free in his personality and character. Well, there's always this danger among Promethean figures who freely explore the darkest depths of inner and outer worlds in their pursuit of knowledge and who discover ways to powerfully express them. In every culture, there are stories of Promethean figures who brave journeys to the underworld in order to discover secrets of the gods and bring those secrets back to the people. Dali felt he had done just that. For example, in the title of this work is his declaration that he learned from some other world of the impending civil war. In an article on Salvador Dali from the website SciArt Journal by Hungarian psychologist Zoltán Kovári, the author concludes his article stating, "It wouldn't be surprising to consider Salvador Dali as such a Promethean figure as well, a kind of modern shaman who experienced his visions, the raw material for his art, in ecstatic internal travels and descents into hell. But the creative, paranoid, critical method that he described goes beyond this and is more complex than the average surrealistic efforts of trying to liberate regressive psychic mechanisms and the automatism of the unconscious." Dali elaborated his dreams, fantasies, and hallucinations using very strict critical principles before turning them into works of art, while, as it is characteristic of great artists and is stressed by Freud, distancing them from their original personal sources. Therefore, his progressive paintings made at the end of the 1920s and in the 1930s are not simply the documents of his adventures in the unconscious. They express general truths of existence. And this is what renders power to their exceptional suggestiveness, unquote. I will stop with Dali in his early 30s. From here on is a dramatic tale of outrageous statements and behavior, a conversion experience to Catholicism, a journey into the extremes of narcissism, and of course, wild eccentricity. If you want to explore Dali's middle and late years, there's plenty of material available on the internet for you. I stop here because the early Dali, in my opinion, is Dali at his best for himself and for us. Dali never needed to take drugs. He said, "I am drunk all the time," by which he meant he felt a continual exuberance that comes from the freedom to be and express one's true self. That was made possible by his fearless exploration of his psyche, his soul. Carl Jung said that all our problems come from one source, our separation from our instinct. I'll say that again. All of our problems come from one source, our separation from our instinct. How could we cultivate a vital relationship with our instinct? Some form of artistic expression, I think, wouldn't hurt us. Therapists often recommend free writing because it's easy to get a pen and a notebook paper and start writing. Writing without letting the pen stop so that we don't hinder any way our exploration wants to meander, wants to take. Finding a guide to help us do dream work wouldn't hurt either. Psychoanalyst James Hollis said, "We don't generate our dreams come to us. They are our psyche, our soul, speaking a symbolic language of vital knowledge and wisdom. Our dreams are like an inner wise shaman or teacher, soliciting a conversation with us." I invite all of us to begin that conversation in some way. What we discover about ourselves will certainly enlighten us, but may shock us as well. But shock us into a deeper and higher and more expansive way of living.